Okay, so while we're waiting for the last few folks to join, I'm just going to make a few announcements before I turn things over to Amit. So first of all, as always, we are still looking for speakers for the ECSS Symposium. Most of the year is wide open. We have one of the half-hour slots booked for April. Yeah, the other slot is open. And then for the rest of the year, the schedule is wide open. Of course, with the exception of July and November, when we don't have the symposium. I put a couple messages in the chat box earlier. Remember to mute when you're not talking. And if you have a question, you can either raise your hand. There's a little raise hand icon at the bottom of the participant list. And if I see hands go up, I'll call on you to ask your question. Or if you prefer, you can just type your question into the chat box and I could ask. And Amit, before we get started, how do you feel about questions? Do you want to take them as we go along, or do you prefer to just cover them at the end of the presentation?
So Bob, fielding questions while I'm doing the presentation is perfectly fine.
Okay.
So I think if people want to just unmute and just ask questions, that's perfect with me.
Okay, sounds good. All right, with that, I'm going to kick things off. We have one speaker for today. This is a little bit different than usual symposium. So Amit Chourasia is going to have the full hour to tell us about SeedMe2. So if you remember going back a ways, there was an original SeedMe project, which, if I get this correct, focused primarily on visualization of results. SeedMe2, I think this is a very exciting project. It goes well beyond that. It's really data sharing, cyber infrastructure for researchers. So with that, I will turn things over to Amit.
Super. Thanks, Bob, for the opportunity to present this project for ECSS group. I think this is a very nice group of people to kind of inform about what we have done here, and potentially they may find some use cases in their work or with their collaborators to kind of pass this information along. And of course, we are always interested in feedback and collaboration going forward. So like Bob mentioned, this is the second generation SeedMe platform, which we have been building for past few years. And this is a great timing to kind of be able to present this work now, because we are very, very close to seeing the platform which we envisioned for generation 2. It's almost at its maturity, so this is a good timing. Okay, so the tagline which we have been kind of thinking about this platform is share, manage, search, and visualize your data, perhaps as never before, right? So this is a little bit of a hyperbole there, but we think we have some simple things which we have thought and implemented, which we think go a long way. And I want to share those details with you. So I'd be using a lot of keywords here. Not going to go through all of them, but SeedMe and SeedMe2 are synonymous for this presentation purpose. And I like to use the word cloud drives as a collective term for Dropbox, Google Drive, and so forth. And lastly, I like the idea of consumable data, and what I mean here is we generally view data as a file system, right? So we can mostly see meta information about the data, its creation date, size, who's the owner, what's the file name or a folder name. But there is a lot of information about that data that goes well beyond what's stored on the file system, and that's where the consumability kind of comes into handy. Not that all the file system things are not important, they are very important, but there is more to data than those things which we are generally used to. And so I like to use that term. So We all deal with data one way or the other. There are lots of things going on in our research space. The data creation pace is increasing, both from individuals' point of view and from team point of view. Data use and reuse is kind of interesting. It's also sort of increasing. We used to create some data, we used to process, analyze it, but perhaps did not revisit it often enough. But now with increased compute capability and tools available, there is a resurgence of use and perhaps reuse within the team and beyond. Research teams obviously are getting much larger. We see this in ECSS all the time. More importantly, research teams are becoming heterogeneous, right? And this is very obvious to us that we collaborate with others as specialists who may be a homogeneous group or themselves may be a heterogeneous groups in terms of what they work on and what their specialty is. Also, we are working with people who are not local. And team members utilize different tools for sometimes same things. And there's a lot of different service providers available to kind of do data handling, management, computation, and so forth. So the data spread is increasing as well. However, there is a lack of powerful and rich data management solutions for researchers. And we hope that we can provide at least some part of rich and powerful capability through this the SeedMe2 platform. I mean, there are lots of issues, and we hope we can at least address few of them. And this is kind of a standard set of problems when we kind of deal with data, right? I mean, access, collaboration, storage, transfer, and automation. And these things have been addressed by a large number of tools and infrastructure and middleware. And in some ways, may be considered as a solved problem to a large extent. Of course, there are gaps. We approach this problem from a different perspective. We think that data is not just files and folders, but it's the context. It's a lot of information which researchers have about that data. That is also a very important piece in this puzzle. And as teams get larger, those contextual information are not easily available across the team members. And while those can generally be found, again, by digging in deeper, they are harder to kind of do that through the tools which are available right now. Also, the presentation of the data mostly falls back to a folder and a file listing, whether it's graphical or textual. That's what the data presentation looks like today. And I think a good example I like to think of is YouTube. YouTube is essentially a bunch of images and files. If we organize those as files and folders, our user experience and discovery process is going to be very different and perhaps limited due to that sort of presentation. And so we want to kind of talk about content-based approach to kind of represent and display the data that is more easily consumable here for the researchers. Due to information dispersion and weak presentation, a lot of data gets lost. It may not necessarily be lost from a storage standpoint, but it gets lost because it's harder to kind of get to it, right? I mean, we can still get to the data at PHPbased, it's just slow, right? We can still get to our attachments, which are included in an email, but it is slow. And most of the times, we have very, very limited ways to kind of discover the data. Essentially, the file handle or the folder name or the file name is the only handle which we have to kind of, go and find that information. And that's generally not enough. So what we are thinking from a SeedMe perspective is, of course, we have data, but we want to consider what is its context, which we call description, how we can display it in a more useful way. Can we enable discussion about this data at any item level, and how can we power the discovery of this data through searchable context? And so this is what the system tries to do. What we have done is created a virtual file system that enables organization of data in a hierarchical format that we are used to. But it also enables us to kind of add those different attributes about the data which are meaningful to the researchers. One such attribute which we kind of built into the file system is what we call description. Some people may want to call this metadata, but I like to differentiate between description and metadata from a utility point of view. They can be the same thing, but the description can be more general, like, hey, I computed this on Frontera, right? Or I computed this on Jetstream, or this instrument was used, and certain parameters need to be kept in mind, or this protocol needs to be followed. So this context can be very, very general. It doesn't have to be very specific. And of course, more fields can be added to the file system to express other items that scientists may deem useful. Of course, search and collaborations are a requirement in this era. And so an ability to share and discuss any item is available. And then of course we want to think about accessibility of this infrastructure through mobile phones and through our clusters, right? And so we need appropriate tools available to kind of talk to these to the system and access the system. So search is based on metadata or description. Both. So once data is entered into the system, it gets indexed, and so you can search based on both. In fact, once you have specific metadata stored as different fields, there is an ability to filter those as well. So that's there's a little bit different than search, but yes. And then of course, there is an ability to automate interaction with the system through our clients or REST API. And then of course, the system itself is available as an instance or a website for a research group or a project. So let's look more into this. So again, this is a list of things which we have, more or less what I mentioned earlier. Not going to go through this in detail here, but the idea is about rich data organization and sharing, right? So here is a quick example of how we compare, and this eventually is always a question but what's the difference between this platform versus all the cloud drives? So here is a folder on a Google Drive, which has a bunch of files in a folder. And here is a snapshot of our platform. So the first thing you would notice is the instance has a custom branding and a domain. This may be frivolous, but it's actually relevant for research groups to be able to kind of extend their brand and be data providers if they wish to do that, and also control that data in their own infrastructure if that is desired. You'll also note that the same folders now carry a description, which is available as soon as you go and visit those folders and pages. So we are not looking at a README file. We are not looking at the email which carries this description. It's available in situ with the files and folders. Some of you people may also note that actually you can write LaTeX, right, which is quite important for some disciplines. For example, this is some data from a physics group which has adopted our platform. Then we want to also enable discussion about any data item at where it's located. So if there is a need, the collaborators can discuss a folder or a file as threaded comments. And this is useful because once you kind of look at the data, that information is retained, and that context is very helpful. And the researchers have told me this thing has come in very handy when they're writing research papers. Also, we are trying to develop some tools which can present the data in a more consumable form. And so, for example, there is a CSV file. If the CSV file is simple enough, our parser tries to parse it and make some semantic guesses about it and present it as a visualization. This visualization is not meant to be perfect or you know, the visualization's goal is to merely provide a preview of the data in a different form. And then, of course, you can switch between different representations. So I'll show you guys an interactive view of this so you'll get a better understanding of what I'm trying to say here. So SeedMe Architecture is a standard web architecture. There is a database, there is a web server, and the platform is built on Drupal 8 content management system, which itself is built upon PHP and quite well regarded Symfony library now. And our entire infrastructure is built up as a set of building blocks. And so we have modules which basically plug into the Drupal content management system. So we gain a lot of capability that is provided by Drupal, but we add our own capability on top of it. So Drupal doesn't have a way of storing files and folders, and that's where we have built our virtual file system, which is called Folder Share. The chart suite essentially shows visualization, which I was talking about. Formatter suite is able to kind of display some textual and storage fields in a more useful way, and so forth. In addition to that, we use some other libraries. Some of them, at least one of them, we have written, and then few others that are available by others, and some from research community as well. On the user interaction side, of course, one of the ways which people interact with the system is through a web browser, but that's not sufficient. We need command line capability to interact with the system from our clusters. And then, of course, we need REST clients to integrate such a capability with other applications. So we have those. Like I was mentioning, the folder share module is a virtual file system which has all necessary controls to manage the files, display the files, share them, do access control. And then it exposes all the file system attributes via REST API. And we have a command line and you know, other REST clients available for integration with other services. Chart Suite in its current form can parse CSV and JSON files and build simple visualizations. Formatter Suite can present text information which is stored. And then we are developing few other things like CI log on auth, where you can authenticate against a set of identity providers like your own institution, perhaps others. So you don't have to remember extra set of username and passwords. A similar thing is needed for gateways interoperability. So we have been working with a couple of gateways to synchronize user management so that the gateway users don't have to use a different username and password to kind of interact with the SeedMe system. I'll talk about that in a moment. So here is a quick view of differences between what SeedMe platform provides versus others. And not that others are not providing a very useful service, it's just that we feel that researchers need something more and more powerful. And that's what we are trying to develop the SeedMe system for. So here is a few quotes from a research group who has been using our system for about a year now. And they have they have gained a lot of productivity after switching to our system. And they are able to kind of, share a lot of information, not only with their team members, but also with their external collaborators. So their pace of discovery and research has increased significantly. And they're especially happy about the fact that when they write research papers, it's very easy for them to identify context about what was computed. And this group actually heavily uses supercomputing, primarily at TAC, but also at SDSC. So we are hoping to release production-ready SeedMe2 platform very, very soon. And we welcome anyone to go ahead and try that. The instance right now, which is available, is a little bit old, but we'll be updating that in a few weeks. So we are very, very, we are at the cusp of releasing this system, which we have been developing for a few years, and very excited about it. So let me quickly show a interactive demo about this system, and then we can take some questions. So there's a question already. How about using ORCID? Certainly, we can integrate with any other identity providers. Yeah, we can do that. So here is a folder available on the system. If we dig into that, we can see that it carries a description. It has, again, a bunch of files and folders. And here is a CSV file, which I was talking about. And this is what happens. Of course, you can download the CSV file. But then we try to create these visualizations. They are not supposed to be perfect because we don't have the semantic knowledge about what the file may be. But if we can parse it, we try to represent it in a form that can be displayed, and then explored with different kind of plotting options that are available. Okay, so there's another chat question. Okay, so I'll revisit this in a moment. If you look here, there's a PDB file. If you folks are familiar with PDB, that's a protein data bank, and they have their own data format. And in this case, what we have done is integrated NGL JavaScript library, which can actually present that protein in an interactive form. And the idea, again, is to provide a quick preview of the data before the users choose to do something with it. And so these are the kind of extension which we can start to kind of implement for the scientific community. If there are JavaScript libraries available that can display the data in a web browser, we can integrate those and make those available to be visible on the web browser. So, of course, you will have similar capabilities like you see on your regular file system. You can create folders, upload files, describe files. So let me do this because this is something which is different. And here we can write, LaTeX, or this can have links and embed images and so forth. And so this becomes very useful for people to kind of express context about their data as they see fit. And this could be done in an ad hoc way at creation time or at a later time. And this becomes quite useful. So similar capabilities like you see on any cloud rise are available, or even on your computer is available to kind of interact with the system, to kind of do all kind of file operations and organization. So similar capabilities are available. Of course, sharing is available as well. You can share, by default, everything is private. But if you choose to make something public, you can, or you can give view or author privileges, read or write privileges, essentially, to site, to users on the site. Okay, let me go over here and kind of give you guys a sense of the internals here really quick. So okay, I need to figure that out. So I was mentioning that the file system is extensible. The commenting is not turning on for some reason. We can add fields of any type to the file system, which may make sense for the work or the project you may have. For example, there may be a need for a date where perhaps a simulation was run, or maybe the instrument collected the data. There may be a need to kind of store other kind of metadata information about the data. And once these are added, you can, these fields are available for any file and folder. So they can be, of course, they can be left blank, but they can be filled in either programmatically or through the user interface. And of course, they can be displayed and filtered and so forth. Let me just skip on adding that because there's, in the interest of time, I can show one working version which has some of these fields built in. So here is a research group which has been using this platform for about a year. So here is an example of, so they have started adding some of these fields which they think are important for their use case. So they do simulation of laser plasma, and these 4 parameters are kind of important for them. And these are normally spread around in 3 different files. So you have to kind of go and figure those out if you're on a cluster. And when somebody's reviewing these things, it's generally they don't have access to the cluster or something like that. Or they can filter these experiments and simulations once these things are kind of entered into the system. So depending on the use case, these additional feeds can be added to provide a richer context about the data that may be may normally be spread around on many files, which becomes kind of taxing to kind of, assess for people who may not have done the simulation or after some time may have passed. Okay, so there is a question about how does this complement or compare with other tools like Dataverse, OSF, and others. So there's already some answer there, but Mona is mentioning something. So fundamentally, most of the tools do not allow a capability of describing things in situ. And this is something which we do. Most of the tools do not allow capability to write visualizations and plugins to kind of interact with the system in a display, or to provide rich display. We do that. And of course, there's another question. So most of the systems, in my view, are still trying to mimic a file system notion and then expose it through the web browser. Our attempt is a hybrid model. We are trying to use the content management notion and then marry it with a file system notion and get the best of the both worlds and make that available to the researchers. And this kind of system is not available by many other systems. So our approach is fundamentally very different than most of the other tools that are available. So I think we have plenty of time for questions. So feel free to mute your mic and I can show other capabilities. If you guys want to see command line interaction, I can show that too. In fact, while people kind of think about some questions, let me just do that. So okay, so I have the right client here. I'm gonna try and connect with this guy. Actually, I should connect as a user. So, all right. Yeah, I know what's going on. This is a demo site which I just set up, and it's not fully set up yet. Nonetheless, I can show you a few things which are very familiar to you folks. So if you notice that our command line interface actually mimics POSIX wherever it can. It has similar command structure to what we see on POSIX system, you know, make, dir, move, copy. We borrow terms from FTP for put and get, which is upload and download. So most of the commands are very similar to the Unix kind of system, and you know, people can interact with the remote site without kind of reading too much about what the system does. So very similar to the Unix kind of file system. And let's see. And so the idea for this is that each project or site can spin up their own instance and then have their own members to share information with them as they see fit. In some ways, while SeedMe2 can be used for post-publication purpose, our main focus is to enable pre-publication research, which is something where a lot of good tools are not available. For post-publication, I think there are lots of repositories and tools available, which are probably very suitable for scientists and domain people to submit their content to. However, in the pre-publication space, they need a very different style of collaboration tools and access controls and things like that we are aiming to provide. Of course, we can turn into a publication based repository system, but our focus mostly has been to support pre-publication research at this time. And in coming years, we are thinking of integrating other to be able to mint DOIs and persistent identifiers for those sites that may see utility for them. We are also thinking of integrating the Open Science Chain project, which is funded by NSF. Okay, so the question is, can our modules be embedded into other PHP-based frameworks besides Drupal? So not really, because our modules are integrally tied with the Drupal framework, which has different notions of how the system interacts with the framework. So there are pieces which can be used. So my understanding is that the file system, internal file system, is written in separate classes, and those things can be can be used by other projects, but you have to dig in a little bit deeper to kind of separate those out. So there are a lot of Drupalisms because we are working with that content management system, but where we can, we have tried to separate some pieces and kind of abstract them out so that if somebody wants to use them, they can. And then there are some other things like the structured data API, which is available for PHP, that's totally standalone. And that came into being that when we started parsing CSV files through PHP, we found that the built-in or the standard library for CSV parser in PHP land is kind of very flaky and not feature rich. So we ended up writing our own parser. And once we wrote that parser for CSV file, we extended it for JSON and a few other things. So you can do data translation with those. So certainly there are pieces that can be used by other platforms. And then of course, there is a REST API and there is a PHP REST client. So you don't have to write your own, which you can integrate with other applications. All right. So let me show you this while, if somebody has additional questions, feel free to pass those along. Yeah.
This is Bob. I actually have a couple of questions and or a comment.
Go for it.
All right. And can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So first of all, to follow up on the comment that Mona posted in the chat box, I think this is really interesting that SeedMe2 can be, that groups can create their own instance of SeedMe2 and maintain it. But is there also a centralized SeedMe2 site like you had for the original SeedMe?
So I think that's a good question. So we are still thinking about that. There are two things which we are hoping to do in next several months. One is to set up a platform where we can provide SeedMe2 as a service to researchers who are interested in. Of course, the software is available and anyone can put up these things together by themselves. But for those people who are interested in just using the platform and not setting it up and operating and maintaining it, we plan to do that as a service. Regarding central repository, we are thinking that at some point we will migrate SeedMe1 to SeedMe2, so that would still be a central resource. However, after operating SeedMe1 for several years now, I think we need a more sustainable approach to keep that going. While people are using it and we can support it very efficiently now, but over a long term, we need to think about how can we do that or continue to do that beyond the grant period. So providing a well-defined solution to research teams and projects is something which we think is useful, because then there is a shared interest in kind of continuing those things, perhaps beyond the grant period. And the research groups have full control and ownership and branding about these instances. And so they have an inherent interest in keeping them or not, beyond certain time frame. Does that answer the question, Bob?
Yep, exactly. And I could see how you might want to get out of the business of hosting the service. Somebody comes along, they have enormous data sets, you're dealing with all of that.
Yeah, I think
managing all of that infrastructure.
I think there are both ways to look at it. I think we can certainly do the hosting, and in fact, I've been trying to figure this thing out internally at SDSC, that what's the best way to do that. In fact, we are somewhere in the kind of in the medium phase, I would say. We have done the discovery And in some cases, it's turning out that AWS is more expensive than what we can do in-house, so that is kind of surprising. So we are exploring things on the hosting side of things on how best to do that. And we are also thinking about, creating perhaps containers that potentially could run on Jetstream. Again, so there is a trade-off between sort of free versus managed, and that is something which each group will decide on whether they want a managed service where somebody else takes care of the infrastructure, or the researchers themselves want to kind of get their hands dirty on that sort of thing. So I don't think there is a perfect answer here. We do want to kind of evangelize and make our product usable by a lot of research groups with minimal cost and effort. And we are going to offer it, as a service, as a software, as containers, provide support, write new grants, and so forth. So we are going to do all of that. But answer is going to be very different for each use case.
Great, thank you. And did you mind if I asked another question, or did you need to go on?
Pardon me, Bob?
Oh, did you mind if I ask another question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So earlier you showed how you were able to integrate one of the tools to visualize the PDB files.
Right. And
of course, I know the software. It's it's open source. You could download. You can make your own modifications. So that integration of a visualization or a charting tool, is that something that is relatively easy to do, or is this something that's difficult that would really require like you or Dave Nadeau to integrate a new tool?
So two answers there. So for the PDB, we did not write the visualization tool. It was written by the PDB group.
Oh, no. So I didn't necessarily mean write the visualization tool, but
okay,
just
the integration part.
But just the integration of it with SeedMe2.
So interesting you asked that. This particular PDB integration was done by an undergraduate intern in few days. So so yes, there are other people who can integrate these things, and I think there is some Drupal knowledge which is required, but I think it's about 30 lines of code. So calling the right JavaScript library, calling the files to be kind of served by the server and then picked up by the JavaScript. So it's not very hard to do this. I think this is an interesting topic you mentioned. I think so. I have some additional thoughts here. So I have been talking with a lot of people at different higher education institutions to see what is being used. Turns out, not in research IT, but in IT, the penetration of Drupal in higher education is tremendous. So there are Drupal developers in a lot of higher education institutions who do, manage a lot of websites for the university and research groups and so forth. And so those are kind of local resources that are available to a lot of people. So in many ways, we have developed a system which can be actually, augmented and maintained by a lot of people, not just our research group, right? So I like to think that, that some of these common web frameworks have a lot of developers. They are like, your Toyota mechanic or Ford mechanic, which you can expect to find in a, more medium-sized city and beyond. So they are available in a lot of universities, and they do these kind of things in a different space. But we are now providing a different flavor of capability, which was not previously available in a content management system like Drupal. And these things can just be included as a part of scientific websites to showcase the research which a group is doing, kind of disseminate their data products from their website if that makes sense, and also use it for collaborations within the team and beyond.
Great, thank you.
And Bob, if I may also add, I think because Drupal is PHP-based, PHP is actually a pretty easy language for a lot of students to pick up. And there is an active, a very big, actually active Drupal community and conferences, yearly, actually, I think twice a year conferences. So there's, it's a pretty easy framework, I think, to get into.
Perfect. So there is another question on the chat. Is the metadata stored on the same file system as raw data files, or is it stored on a database? So the metadata is stored on the database. Typically, Drupal sites have canonically used database like MySQL as the database backend, but there is support for Postgres and some other databases also. The NoSQL sort of databases are special purpose, and there's special integration for those sort of things in Drupal, like Redis already has integration for those sort of things. But the Redis database is not the main database for Drupal. You still need a relational database to store key information about Drupal. But there are mods that are available in the contributed space where those can be used. So from our point of view, the way our integration works, we follow the Drupal framework API, and the Drupal framework is responsible to write the information into whatever database that person has set up or is or compatible with, and that information goes into that database. So I just wanted to mention that you can visit our site at any time. It's dibs.seedme.org. There is this try it option there, where if you go, you can create a sandbox website, which is just good for 7 days. But if you want something more persistent, just let me know. We can set a container for you that is that's not going to get purged after 7 days, and you can play with the site. It's fully functional. By default, we do not provide administrative privileges to this site. Again, if you need those, just send an email. We are happy to grant admin privileges to that site. And you can play with this, create users, put some data in there. I think the data is data size is limited to the largest file you can upload is 500 megabyte, but you can upload many more. So it's meant to provide a quick demo and evaluation. But of course, we can set up something which is more capable and more persistent. So that's on our website. And of course, if you want to kind of delete your sandbox, you can do that as well. So that's our website is dibs.seedme.org. And then, of course, you can download our software as well from there. Yeah. I think Chunhan also had a question about, let me see what he was asking. So what is your software release plan? Is it open source? Yes, it is open source. I believe we follow the same Drupal convention as, so Drupal is open source and available under GPL version 2. And so all our software is available under the same license. We don't want to kind of, we wanted to follow the same licensing scheme as the framework itself. However, our structured data API, which is not dependent on Drupal, that's licensed under BSD 2-clause license. So we want to make all the software available without restriction as much as possible for anyone to use, not just the research community, but for anyone. And we are already seeing some adoption happening. We see that, you know, some of the modules which we have posted on Drupal, and we just started posting these modules recently, and they are starting to get downloaded and being used on different websites already. Since we have a couple minutes, I can also mention a couple of gateway integrations that we are doing with SeedMe2. We are integrating SeedMe2 with Cypress Gateway, which is quite popular and well-used gateway that allows computation of phylogenetic data on different Exceed resources. However, they do not have a data sharing capability, which is something which their users have requested. And so we are integrating, we have completed the first phase of integration with the Cypress project, where the users can cross-authenticate, and Cypress can move data on behalf of the users and make it available on the SeedMe instance. So from a user point of view, they just log into Cypress, click on a link which says, share data or data share or something like that, and they cross over to the SeedMe instance, and they don't have to log in. Everything happens on the back end, and they can see their data and share it with others. We are also doing the same integration with Gen App project, which is a framework to create gateways. They are also in the same state. In fact, they are a little bit more advanced than the Cypress. Gen App is trying to synchronize data between itself and SeedMe2. And so that work is also underway, and we hope to complete it in next few months. So by the time we are production ready, we should have a couple of gateways which have integrated SeedMe2, and a few groups who are actively using the SeedMe2 platforms. And we are looking for for more people to kind of at least explore our platform and see if it makes sense for them to adopt it and perhaps extend it. All right, looks like the question stream has stopped. But very nice that I had a little bit more than half an hour for this thing. So that kind of gave us good amount of time for discussion.
Yep, great. Thank you, Amit. That was really interesting. Yeah, thanks for taking the time for the presentation, for the demo, and for answering all the questions. Just a reminder to everybody that the slides and a recording of the presentation will be available on the ECSS Symposium webpage. We usually get that done within a couple of days. And like I said at the beginning of the talk, always looking for presenters at the ECSS Symposium. So feel free to volunteer yourself, get in touch with me, or if you have any suggestions for outside speakers who you think would be a good fit, let me know. And if there's nothing else, we will wrap up.
Thanks, Bob.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, guys.